On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, a big bump in the road ahead when your agency opens again.
There are going to be a number of challenges in terms of personnel outside the federal government because the for-profit enterprises that serve the federal government can't count on back pay. They can't count on some of these things in the same way that the feds can.
Former Deputy Director for Management, Margaret Weichert, on FedGov Today in just a moment. First, though, one DOT-IT is the goal for the Transportation Department's Chief Information Officer. He lists processes, people, and products as part of the path to get to that goal. Pavan Padugu, the Chief Information Officer at DOT, will tell you about it on the last FedGov Today TV we recorded before the shutdown. You can watch the show on the FedGov Today YouTube channel anytime, and it's available on demand on our website, fedgovtoday.com. If the government's still closed on Wednesday, it will mark the longest shutdown in history. There are rumblings, though, that the shutdown could end as soon as this week, meaning federal employees could be headed back to work soon. Margaret Weichert's former Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget. Margaret, welcome. It's great to talk to you again. What do you expect that people will find when they fully reopen that they weren't expecting to find when they fully reopen? Welcome, Margaret.
Thanks so much for having me, Francis. It's great to be here. I think one of the things, it wasn't a complete surprise, and I'm sure there are people thinking about this in preparing for hopefully what is not too distant from now opening of the government. A number of things are more complicated when a shutdown is more than 30 days. First and foremost, access to buildings and access to computers are typically driven on 30-day cycles. And so one of the biggest challenges, and something we did in 2019 when people came back, was really stage the IT and building support for people external to the building so that we could ease the transition of people back into the building if their PIV cards were not in a right space. So that's probably the biggest one. There may, in fact, be queues. There may, in fact, be challenges technically when the feds come back to work.
Is there a complication potentially in the fact that everybody has to be in the office now and that it might be difficult for agencies to stagger? If I recall correctly, I think there were some agencies that staggered the return to office and let people telework for a little while. Is that a potential complication this time around, Margaret?
Yes. And so although, in 2019, not everyone was working from home, there were still a reasonable number of people returning. But there were still some people who were remote workers. That the balance of on-site workers versus remote workers may create additional challenges. Union clock-in times may also affect how much flexibility there is to stagger people's return to work. So I think that there could be some challenges there.
GAO did some after-action work on the 2019 shutdown, and I know that internally you and your colleagues took a look at what happened and how it happened. What was your major takeaway about the things that you wish you would have done differently?
Well, I think that the thing that we did probably about halfway through the shutdown was pull together all of the operating functions of government and the people leading both the activities happening during the shutdown and also the return to work, was get together on a daily basis to really talk about the issues. I wish we had done that earlier during the shutdown, and I expect hopefully people have taken those lessons to heart and have been doing that in this shutdown. One of the other things I think we didn't really think about was the surge in impact on frontline, what we now call high impact service provider organizations. So a lot of confusion during the shutdown, as well as lack of staffing for certain functions, created pent-up demand for services afterwards. To the extent we miss the SNAP deadline, we will have, more programmatic issues related to that. the furlough of workers in IRS or elsewhere could also create other issues. The good news is we're not, when we came back in 2019, it was right before a major quarterly tax filing deadline. So we're not quite in that spot as it relates to the IRS, but there are a lot of things that were triggered at that time by the year end and the January 15th date. So I would encourage people to think about in their mission, what things are triggered by year end preparations, what things are triggered by things that might have happened typically in October, and think about, you're going to really be jammed going up towards Thanksgiving if, hopefully we open up again soon.
What is your sense of how long it should take to kind of get back to the normal cadence of business, or is a shutdown of this length sufficiently long that you don't really get back to the normal cadence of business? It looks different than it did before.
It's a really good question. I think a lot depends on the missions and what was missed during that time frame, during 2018 to 2019. A good chunk of the time was during what is a very slow time for many agencies around the holidays. So we, I would say, had pretty much gotten back to business as usual by the end of January. There were payroll problems that kind of, took a little while to unroll, and that will be, an issue in this circumstance as well. I don't know, particularly given some of the differences in what was accepted versus non-accepted activity. There may be some things, for example, in data and statistical reporting that just, won't happen. There won't be a catch-up. That it won't make sense to do a catch-up. Some of the BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics functions, I think they may just average out between previous and next functions. But I think anything that is service to our customers, the citizens, those things are going to have to be dealt with. And it again is going to depend on the mission, how long that takes.
A number of folks that I've talked to have said that this is not a linear kind of recovery, might not be the right word, but to kind of get back to normal. It's not linear, it's exponential. Is that your observation too, that the longer it goes, the longer it becomes on the back end to try to kind of get back to normal?
I think it's not a pure geometric thing. I think there's step functions. I think 30 days is one of those step functions. Because basically you've lost a whole month. There are a number of other things that are going to be more problematic with a longer shutdown, but they don't get progressively problematic. For example, with any kind of contracted work, with consulting firms or other things, to the extent that was stopped for 30 days, there's a very high likelihood that any of the staff that were working on that work will be either redeployed elsewhere, or in some cases, the consulting firms are having financial pressure. Some of those people may have been laid off in the interim. So there are going to be a number of challenges in terms of personnel outside the federal government, because the for-profit enterprises that serve the federal government can't count on back pay. They can't count on some of these things in the same way that the feds can.
Is it your sense that there is a strategy to getting back to normal cadence as quickly as possible, or is it just as simple as just get after it as best you can?
I'm not close enough to know what the actual strategy is. I would say, in general, there is a belief in this administration that there are activities that that aren't priorities. It's not that they don't matter, but given our fiscal situation, there are activities that may be luxuries that we can't afford. And so going the extra mile to kind of fix those things is not going to be a priority. But for many things, and I would certainly hope for things that affect our citizens directly, whether they're SNAP and TANF recipients, or they're farmers looking to get USDA support for things, whether they're people trying to get permits or, people trying to sort out their tax situations. I am very hopeful that the administration is going to want to do right by those missions, even if they may have to, make some trade-offs about exactly what is the first priority.
One of the tools that you had that the current administration doesn't have publicly, at least, is the president's management agenda to align to as kind of a North Star at the OMB level to go to the agencies. And then you and I talked at that time about syncing up that to this is how we're going to kind of get back to the business of the government. Is that a challenge potentially for how agencies are going to realign, or are you confident that they are confident enough of their missions to be able to use the mission as the North Star and not necessarily have to tack to a particular document?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing that was great about the president's management agenda, and I think any North Star type document, to the extent that most of the work of government is actually going to be executed by people who are careers and may not really have a clarity about how their mission aligns to the priorities of the president, having something that helps connect the dots is really helpful, because in my experience, 99.9% of feds want to do what the democratically elected president and his administration want to do, but they may not fully understand how to connect the dots. And when there isn't that dot connecting going on, there is a risk that the individual bias of an agency or the individual former understanding of mission may override. And in a lot of cases, that may mean the agency is not totally aligned with where the administration is trying to go. So I would encourage the administration to help provide some of that connectivity with a North Star type strategy that assumes goodwill among the federal workforce. That may be an aspirational hope, but it is one that I found super useful, and it helped actually the president achieve more of his objectives in the first term.
Not his or her yet, Margaret, but it's coming.
I know. Yeah, that was a interesting thought experiment.
Aspirational in your mind, I suppose. It's great to talk to you as always, my friend. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Francis.
You can read more about preparing to reopen the government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The FedGov Today podcast is back tomorrow. Former Deputy CIO at the Pentagon, Rob Carey, tells you what to expect in the cloud in 2026 for DoD. If you don't want to miss that, you can follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on the FedGov Today YouTube channel, or on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Talk to you then. Thanks for listening.